As many of you know, Leica has an extensive catalog of cameras and lenses, right? We're talking about generations of products that can really help someone tell a story. And this is a video that I didn't think I'd get the opportunity to make, but we're here at Kevin Fickling's workshop. We've been friends for a bit now, and you've taken a bit of a pause from your photography, from your leather making to entertain this idea. And it's this concept of like, how do you get into these vintage, these more character lenses in the Leica lineup? Now, as anyone has seen on my previous videos, I have a lot of modern solutions that I've been using for the storytelling that I'm doing.
Yep.
But I've always wanted to find out, is there something in the catalog, in all this history that I can use to tell a different kind of story?
Absolutely.
So we're going to talk about some 35 options. We're going to talk about some 50 options. We're going to talk about some wildcard options.
Yep.
The first thing I want to ask you, though, is before you even get that far,
Okay.
how do you ensure that you're going to get a good copy of the lens? When you're thinking about, lenses that are decades old,
Yeah.
fungus, haze, moisture, all this kind of stuff. So what are the things that you should be looking out for, and how can you protect yourself when you're going
Absolutely.
out to get a vintage lens?
Yeah, absolutely. Buying a vintage lens can be quite a daunting task, to be honest with you, especially when you're first getting into it and you don't know what to look for. So I just want to explain a few things that you can look for and that aren't too difficult and kind of give some education. Of course, this isn't end all be all, but there's definitely a few things to look for more on vintage lenses that aren't necessarily a problem on modern lenses, whether that means that the coating is harder so it's less easy to scratch, or
Right.
it's, of course, it's just a newer lens so you're less prone to problems. But the biggest thing that I tell people, maybe two things maybe, is most of them you're going to have what's called a coating on the front element. And starting with the M lenses in 1954, right around that time is when optical coatings started becoming a thing. And through the 30s and the 40s, it was about polishing and glass formulas, but they discovered that coatings could increase contrast, increase hardness, do a lot for the performance and the characteristics of the lens. But being a generation and an early adoption of something, the coatings are very soft. We're so spoiled nowadays. Modern coatings are hard. You can clean things. I mean, they're pretty difficult to damage, just like on our sunglasses or on a lens. But the biggest thing that you need to look for right away is this front coating, because when the lens gets dirty, of course, we want to clean it. And the coatings are so soft that if you don't remove all the large debris first before going in for cleaning, you can create coating marks. Um, Now, the front element, if you have some coating marks, which to be honest with you, about 99% of these lenses are going to have it, it's not going to really do anything on the front element. You're going to shoot through it. You're not going to notice too much. Just like if you have a piece of dirt on the front element, it's not going to make a huge difference. So some minor coating marks, you don't need to look at the lens and think, oh my gosh, it's got one little coating mark on it. It's going to completely change the performance. It's not like that. It's not how it works. But just make sure that you're not looking at it and going, wow, it's a completely hazy surface, or the coating can flake off. Now, the one thing with coatings is the rear element. The rear element, closer to the plane of film or the sensor, is going to be a lot more prone to showing up. So scratches in the rear element is something I typically try to avoid if you can. And people tend to clean the rear element less because it's recessed and deeper in the lens. So generally, the front element's where you're going to find most of the damage. So that's the first thing. The other thing I tell people is take your cell phone out, turn your flashlight on, and you're going to want to look through the lens with the aperture wide open. And you want to look basically not at the front, not at the rear, but you're going to look kind of in the middle of the lens. And you can train yourself to visually kind of see the different elements, because there's going to be a little dust and maybe some haze, things like that. But you just want to make sure that you don't see, for me, the biggest thing is fungus growing. So it kind of looks like a petri dish where you see like these specimens growing, because what that can do is it can actually etch away the glass, and it really can cause irreparable damage. Some haze, which is kind of like a dust that forms inside, a qualified technician can clean, not a problem. You can do some haze and some light fungus, things like that. And there's a few places, depending on where you live, that you can have that done. But fungus and some heavier haze can cause a problem. So the two things: look at your coatings, see how badly it's scratched. It's probably going to have some. Make sure it's not too bad, and then look inside the lens with a flashlight, and just make sure you don't see anything growing inside there like a petri dish. That's kind of important. And it can be hard buying online, because, to be honest with you, a lot of sellers of these old lenses are dishonest, and that you see excellent plus, these crazy descriptions. But the biggest thing I've learned with all this vintage stuff, whether it's a camera or a lens, educate yourself, know what to look for, and make your own decision whether it's something you want or not.
Right.
That's really
Amazing. And look, there's some people watching that might know a lot of that already, but I wanted to get
yeah,
that
for
out of the
sure.
way because there's a lot of new people coming into the M system,
Yep.
and they might not know what specifically to look out for. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
But
Long-winded, but I mean, I think you understand.
no, I think it's valuable to know. But I'm telling you right now, I want to talk about optics. Okay,
Let's do it. I'm ready.
Here's the premise. I want to go through the 35s, the 50s, and some wild cards.
Absolutely.
And I want to know, you're gonna show me your lens, but I want to see what are the ones that you look out for if you want a ton of character, a ton of, something that just has personality to it in a way.
Yep.
But to also give us some sleeper hits, some things that might be a little bit more modern in some ways, but still have a unique story to them, right? That might not be as characteristic in terms of their rendering. So let's start with 35 first.
Okay.
What do you got
Let's
for
do
us?
it. Yeah, so speaking with that, what's cool about this lineup here, and keep in mind, these are my favorites. It's not every vintage lens, although we have a pretty nice selection here. But these are my favorites, and they really do kind of cover those three things. You have some that, man, when you put it on a modern camera, you're shocked how sharp and how, oh my gosh, this lens from 1962 or, whatever, 40, 50, 60, 70 years ago, it's so amazing. And then we also have some that, at the time, like the Summilexes, they'll kind of compromise some optical performance in the name of speed. They're just trying to get, because back then film, if you had 400 ISO, wow, it's fast. 800 ISO, you're pushing, but you just wanted to let maximum light in. So sometimes some compromises were made optically to kind of allow for a faster lens. But nowadays, rather than a compromise, we kind of look at that as a positive, where some softness, some glow, maybe some beautiful flares. So we kind of have a nice range of that in our 35s and the 50s. So the first lens I want to talk about is this one right here. This is called a 35 version 1 Summicron. So this is the first Summicron that Leica has come out with in 35 millimeters. It's the first version, and you'll see it referred to as what's called an 8 element. So there's 8 elements of glass inside of this lens, and this is kind of universally, people don't call it a Summicron version 1. You just hear it's the 8 element.
Got it.
So this in silver here is kind of your most common finish that you'll find. Some were made in Canada, some were made in Germany. There's not a huge build quality difference between the two. Sometimes you'll find that in lenses, but either way, the 8 element is one of my favorite Leica lenses.
So is there any truth to the ones in Canada being better or the ones in Germany being better?
Certain lenses, one that I don't have here, I'll quickly touch on, the version 4 that some people refer to as the King of Bokeh. The German version has many more metal parts inside of it, so it's actually a far superior lens. The funny thing with this lens, people actually think the Canadian version's better.
Oh.
They say a friend of mine is a master technician. He prefers the Canadian version. Now you'll see the German version sell for more because people like the name made in Germany on there, but kind of a little secret is the Canadian lenses are slightly better built. So they're referred to as kind of the ones to look for. This happens to be a Wetzlar version.
Right.
And this one I bought completely in disarray and had kind of restored, and I love being able to do that, have lenses cleaned and restored. But yeah, the 8 element is incredibly sharp when you stop it down. I mean, this lens around f4, f5.6.
So as soon as you get to f4.
Oh my God, on a modern M11, 60 megapixels, you think, you see nowadays, oh, we redesigned this lens for better optical performance. Okay, put a lens from 1962 on your modern M11, shoot at f4, 5, 6, be blown away by the sharpness. Wow. It's unbelievable.
Okay.
Open it up to f2, still really sharp in the center. You lose a little bit of contrast, and then you start to get some of that glow. But this would be my kind of middle ground. It's not crazy like the Summilux, like you're not getting these insane flares. Of course, the coatings are less complex than what we have now, so you're going to get some of that.
Right.
This is a nice mid-range. The 8 element, it's one of the most revered.
So it's a balance of sharpness and character,
exactly.
Right? Without being too crazy.
And it's cool because you stop it down, you get some sharpness, you open it up, you get some of that character.
Right.
But the 8 element is definitely one of the most revered Leica lenses of all time with collectors and enthusiasts and people that love to shoot. This lens, shoot with, and actually you'll hear this a lot with these lenses in the Summicron line.
Right.
T-Max 100 with this lens at f4, 5, 6 will blow your mind.
Okay.
So sharp. That's what I recommend trying it with. Or a modern monochrome. It looks amazing.
Okay. Awesome.
And just really quickly, we have the silver one here, which is your more common version. And we have a really rare black version. There's different variations. We won't get too much into it. This is a black chrome lens, and it has the brass focus tab. So this would have black paint over brass, and then also the scale, the distance scale, one of them is red. So there's all these little variations can mean tens of thousands of dollars of difference in value. It's pretty amazing. But typically people are going to find silver ones. But if you come across a black one, pretty amazing.
Yeah, if you're looking at something to get started to use, you go silver.
Absolutely.
And if you're ridiculous and you want a collector's item, you want something that you can cherish, a bit of a holy grail thing, you're going for something like that.
Definitely.
As soon as you said black paint and brass, we're talking.
Yeah. Exactly. And one thing I guess I want to throw back to in the beginning, another thing to look out for is you're going to see the stuff and you're going to look at the black paint. It's beautiful. Like a lot of things we have here.
Yeah.
Just be very careful. There's a ton of counterfeits and fakes out there. So buy from a reputable place. Even that, you got to be careful. It really comes down to making your own decisions, whether you think something's authentic or
Right,
not.
because I imagine some people might be painting it themselves,
Yeah,
customizing it
definitely.
themselves, and marking up the price. Okay, so we talked about that, a kind of healthy middle ground.
Yep.
35, what's next? What else you got for us?
Okay, so next we're going to talk about the steel rim, which many of you have probably heard of now because they've remade this lens. Something Leica is doing that I think is so cool. They're making these remakes. They did the 28 Sumeron, they did the Tham bar, now they've done the steel rim. So we actually have an original one here. And the steel rim at this time was out around when the M3 was still being produced. And the M3 only has 50 millimeter frame lines. So the version we see here is called with goggles. And also the 8-element Summicron, you'll see some with goggles. So this is a goggled version. The non-goggled versions are like crazy expensive. These are still very expensive, but you can get into a goggled version a lot less expensive than an original one. Now, I guess what I'll say is the original and the remake render similarly, but there is some pretty significant differences in the coatings.
Got it.
So all these modern lenses, and I think rightfully so, use a modern multi-coated system where it's going to be more robust and durable, but it does increase contrast and reduce flaring. This 35 steel rim original has the most beautiful rainbow flares of any lens of all time, in my opinion. When you shoot this backlit for portraits, wide open, it is like a blossom of rainbow and color and softness. Which is not for everybody, but it does have that ultimate, if you just want ultimate character and a beautiful portrait lens, the steel rim is amazing. Now, one thing I'll mention about any goggled lens, you're going to be able to focus closer, which is cool. The steel rim normally is a 1 meter minimum focus distance, but with goggles, you're at 0.65. So kind of a close focus lens for you guys from, the early 1960s. Pretty amazing.
Wow.
So yeah, the steel rim original, amazing flares, beautiful. Now the remake is a great option that you're not spending $10,000 for something like that, or one without goggles, $20,000-$30,000. If it's black, it could be $60,000 or $70,000. It's just crazy.
Right.
Now this is a great way to get a character and then not worry about, does it have fungus, does it have coating scratches. You can walk in right now for a reasonable price, buy this lens, and you get 99% of that without any of the hassle. So for people that want to travel down that vintage road, maybe some of the looks, and they want to see, do I like this or not? This is a good way to kind of get into it and see that. So I highly recommend it. I mean, it's cool. Now, what I will say is, don't buy this lens and because it's new, think, oh, this is going to perform like my close focus Summalex, because I think that's a big issue. I see a lot of these lenses, they're hard to get in the beginning, and then all of a sudden a bunch of them flood onto the market because I think people don't understand this is not meant to compete with the modern lenses, it's meant to complement it, right?
Right.
This is a great pairing. You have both lenses, so definitely try these, but I would say give it a try, run through the different apertures, and this lens does sharpen up quite a bit when you stop it down, original or remake. And then quickly, just kind of this last one here. This is a recently released black version of the remake. They only made 200 pieces, and they're all sold out. Incredibly hard to get, so very special that we have that.
Right.
You're kind of on this cool. This is a piece unique black paint M7 that Leica made for me, and it looks beautiful on here.
Absolutely,
so, pretty special.
absolutely, especially with the red script on that. So
Definitely.
You've given us an option that's sort of like a safe option. You've given us something with wild character.
Yep.
Now you told me off camera there is something that
I have his lens. I think that's going to be the perfect balance.
Okay.
Now these are old, and we're talking vintage, and it's crazy that 1991 is kind of going to be considered old. Makes me feel old because that's when I was born. But the next lens we have is a very special lens that was produced in extremely low quantities. It's called the 35 double Aspherical, or as you would see on the front of the lens here, it actually says Aspherical. Now people might be saying Aspherical, the modern one's the ASPH.
Yeah.
Okay, but it doesn't say Aspherical on it. And that's how you kind of determine this lens. And what makes this so special is Leica, I think, the steel rim, believe it or not, went through many different body variations and shapes, and you'll see they call it a pre-aspherical.
Right.
That lens lasted for 40 years almost, like 40 or maybe over 40 years. It's incredible how long that lens lasted.
Right.
And to be honest, the performance aged with time, right?
Yeah.
I mean, by the 90s or late 80s when they were making that, to be honest, the performance wasn't there.
Yeah.
So Leica went to work, and they didn't take one step up in performance. I mean, this lens is like 20 times step up in performance. It's amazing. So this lens made in 1991 in the film era has better chromatic aberration and control than even your modern close focus lens. But it blends slightly more character, a little bit of glow. I call this, basically, it's like my favorite lens, the 0.95 Noctilux
Right.
of 35s. So this has some of that Noctilux beauty and bokeh and glow, but it's still very sharp, has great chromatic aberration control. But the special thing about this and why it's called a double aspherical, two of the lens elements were actually ground on the same machines by hand that they used for the original Noctilux 1.2 double aspherical, also an incredibly legendary lens. Wow. So the 1.2 they stopped producing in the 60s because it was so hard to make. They came out with the F1, which was easier to make. The same thing happened with this, but even on a crazier scale. They allotted 2,000, or I think 3,000 of these are going to make the first year. They got through. There's arguments it's anywhere from 1,000 to 2,000 of these, and they realized, wow, we're having to throw away 60% of the elements we make because they're not passing quality control. Because at the time they didn't have the technology to automate the grinding process, so it was all done by hand,
right.
and they were using very like exotic glass in this, just really hard to make.
Right.
And that's when they went back to the drawing board a year later and came out with what's called like the pre-FLE, which in my opinion does not perform as well as this, but it's a much more reproducible, mass-produced lens. And that used I think like a poured and formed element versus like a ground and polished element.
Gotcha.
And if I'm not mistaken, this is the first Leica lens to have two concave front and rear elements. So the front element is concaved, and if you look at the rear element, it's concave.
Right.
Which you see on lenses that came after this, but that was also a pretty unique feature. But for me, I enjoy 35, but 50 is really my M focal length. It's what I fell in love with M's.
Yeah.
But this lens makes me shoot 35. I mean, for fashion and portraiture, it is just unlike anything else. It's very low distortion, like a modern Leica lens.
I imagine something like this, if you're going to a place with a lot of character and color and you want to showcase that, you want to actually like use the textures to your environment. Like this is something. Wow.
It just has this has the Leica magic, you know. Okay. This is the epitome of the Leica look to me in a 35. So it's very special. I hope Leica comes out with a 35 Noctilux someday, but for now this will hold me over.
Okay.
But unfortunately, again, I understand some of these lenses are incredibly valuable and hard to find, but you know, it's cool that we can talk about them. And for me, when I was starting my collecting journey, man, it's so hard to find information and things like this. So for me to be able to share this with you and some other people to get an understanding of this, I love doing this. It's really cool.
These are the things that you sort of look forward to, that you covet, that you know, it's fine. Like there's some people that are going to collect them. What I respect about you is that you are getting these and shooting these and making this information available to us. And
absolutely,
that is something that we're going to have to test out.
We're testing that.
And for better or for worse, I'm going to have to see how that performs.
Yeah.
So we got the 35s out of the way.
Yes.
Let's talk 50, because here's the thing. I've said this before. 50 is not typically the focal length that I gravitate towards.
Absolutely.
It's not something that I personally get, excited about.
Yep.
But there's a time and a place that I do.
For sure.
What happened over the last year, though, I picked up the modern 50 Summilux for some storytelling, some more detail-oriented images that I'm going after.
Absolutely.
And it impressed me. It's like, okay, cool.
It is.
I might not shoot it as much as my 35, but I know when to use it. I know how to use it. And so I got to ask you, someone that is a fan of the 50, that lives with 50. Let's go through the motions.
For sure.
Talk about which ones you got for us there.
So, talking about your lens, when I recommend a lens for someone, they say, what's the first Leica lens I can buy? It's that lens right there. Because it gives you a balance of sharpness and character. But we can build on that. There's some lenses that have a lot more character, a lot more sharpness. And then this is kind of a good balance. But some of the stuff we'll talk about here is some vintage alternatives where it will complement the sharpness of that, but then maybe give you something different. That's what I always tell people. Eventually, you kind of go down this crazy rabbit hole of buying, I have this version of this, and you start buying kind of the same look.
Right.
And that's okay for collecting, but I love to shoot. So I went through a very unorganized period of collecting or buying, whatever you want to call it, where I kind of bought everything. I tried it. I tried all the different versions. And now this is, believe it or not, kind of a slimmed down of just more special versions of what I really love.
Right.
So yeah, 50 millimeter is what I fell in love with on a Leica. On an M3 was my first Leica, and the Collapsable was my first Leica lens. But the first one I want to talk about here, which I would say is a good balance, kind of like we were talking about, is this 50 rigid right here. So this is the rigid Summicron, which was the second version of the Summicron that Leica had come out with after this Collapsable here. But this lens, as I threw it on your camera yesterday and said, stop it down a little bit, shoot a portrait, and the look on your face was just like, on 60 megapixels, how can this lens?
I mean, this is look. We shot it, and I didn't know what to expect, but you get that fine detail. Like you look at the eyelashes, and it resolves on a 60 megapixel sensor. Let me also take a minute to say, look, this thing is brassed and used to hell, and there's nothing wrong with that because there's always gonna be one person that wants, oh, why do you have all? Just shut up for a second. It's gonna be okay. It's gonna be okay. The camera works great,
Yes,
and if you're asking me, the patina looks awesome.
Yeah.
So this rigid, I hear the rigid word often, and I've seen videos, but I haven't quite had it explained in a way that, you know, photographers like me want to have it explained.
Definitely.
So tell us, what makes this lens coveted? What makes it like a lens that people really want to add to their collection?
Absolutely. So quickly, the reason why it's called rigid, this is the version that came before it. It's collapsible, so you can fold it. Pretty cool feature. But on the rigid, to improve a bit of performance, they made it rigid, not collapsible. So that's why it's called a rigid. And the Summicron is kind of regarded as, Leica kind of have these two lines. They have a Summilux, which is let's get light in. Noctilux, let's get light in. Summicron, let's go for all out optical performance. Kind of like today, we have a Noctilux, which is character, and you have the Apo, which is, you know, all out imaging performance, micro contrast. So that even back then we were kind of doing that. And my friend that's a Leica technician does a ton of sharpness testing, and he tells me that at 5.6 f4 to 5.6, this lens starts to turn apochromatic, even for a lens from the late 50s.
Wow.
So great correction, incredible sharpness. And when you, again, kind of like this lens is very similar, I would say, in performance and the way it works to the 8 element that we talked about, where you stop it down. Of course, you know, you're going to have more depth of field, but sharpness is crazy.
Right.
Edge to edge sharpness. And then when you open it up to f2, still acceptably very sharp, but beautiful character. Bokeh falls out of place very quickly, and but the big thing is modern lenses, especially like Peter Carba, the way he designed them is to be shot wide open always. Now, back in the older days, we didn't have the technology to allow that, so you kind of have a double like purpose in the lens, where like nowadays you can shoot a Apo at f2 and you're going to get maximum performance. He says only stop down for depth of field, right? Whereas this, if you want sharpness, that's something to consider with any vintage lens, no matter what. The more you stop it down to a certain point, it is going to sharpen up a lot, but it's cool. It's not like you have to stop down to f8 or f11. You know, even one stop, two stops on these, still get that nice bokeh depth of field and a nice bump in sharpness. But for me, I love shooting it wide open.
So this is that healthy balance. That's sort of middle ground of character when you need it, and then sharpness when you need it.
And honestly, this would be a lens I would say very affordable. You know, again, one, you got to look out for problems, but you can buy a nice copy anywhere from like $1,000 to $1,500 US.
Wow.
If you get lucky, maybe $800. So a lens unbelievable on film. I mean, this lens is crazy. There's only one other lens I would say is better on film, but this.
And in terms of that, so like what year are you kind of looking to get? What are sort of best practice? Because again, when you're looking at a Leica lens under $2,000, that's almost considered a bargain. You know, especially with all the lenses we have.
After this video, maybe the price is going to go up, but
But so what year should you look for? What are some best practices if you're looking to buy something like this?
Definitely. So there's two versions of this lens. There's a version 1 and a version 2. This is a version 2 here. The only difference is the coatings vary slightly, but the body design is different. So the version 1 I don't have here, but will have a slightly different ring here. Honestly, in my opinion, buy whatever you can find that's clean and whatever you prefer in looks. It doesn't really matter. The performance is not massively different, and these are anywhere from like late 50s into the 60s. Is kind of when this lens was around.
Gotcha.
And in my opinion, you don't need to look for a specific year. Look for something that's clean optically.
Gotcha.
And you'll see, honestly, one of the worst things for a vintage lens is to keep it in a box in a closet. So it may cosmetically, wow, it looks beautiful, it looks unused. But then inside, you know, if you have fungus or it's been in a harsh environment, the lens could be completely unusable and unfixable. So yeah, definitely look out for that. But I think out of all these lenses here, the rigid Summicron is probably the best value for performance and the best complement to a modern lens in a 50.
Right.
Definitely. With the 8 element or maybe a steel rim if you want ultimate character, but in 50 mil, the rigid is pretty amazing.
Gotcha.
And speaking of this, we're going to move into our next lens that I would,
okay, so that's that healthy balance.
That's the rigid. This is your healthy balance.
Right.
Now, optically, this lens, the collapsible, it came before the rigid.
What is this specifically called?
So this is a version 1 Summicron.
Got it.
So it was kind of the first Summicron. This came out in 1953,
And
a year
then
before the
in
M,
the space, it's called the Collapsable.
because you have that collapsible
Gotcha.
nature. So you can see, you twist it to it has like a locking mechanism.
Gotcha.
And then it collapses.
Gotcha.
The reason, to be honest, these are very similar in performance. The rigid is going to perform a little better. The reason I tend to shy away from recommending these right away is you can damage a digital camera by collapsing it into the camera. And it's just something you want to do, and you kind of tend to do that.
Right.
Because the reason is when you collapse it, this rear element here protrudes back past the lens. So certain cameras, you can hit the shutter and you can cause damage. So
Right.
just something to keep in mind. If you do end up buying a collapsible, just keep it uncollapsed on a digital camera.
Right.
Film M's, no problem. You can collapse it, and it's amazing. I mean, it's much more compact than a rigid. It's just beautiful. This is my first Leica lens. Was a M3 and a collapsible 50.
Right.
And to this day, probably my favorite Leica image of all time was shot with this lens on my first M3. Now, back then, I bought this because it was a cheap lens, not knowing how good of a lens it was, and I sold it, and I regretted that always. And when I started kind of going down the road of getting stuff, it was like, man, I got to get that lens back. I would look at that photo that I took, and it's just like, man, the contrast, the character, the real life feel I had. It really just feels like it brings me into that image.
So you say that the characteristics visually are similar to
yes,
the original?
so
Very similar.
characteristics are similar.
Yeah.
The price is similar. The collapsible is generally going to be in that like $700 to $1,000 range. So again, an amazing value.
Okay.
Now the one thing on this, they did produce it for quite a long time.
Yeah.
And there's a few different coating variations, but also glass variations.
Right.
So we have two here. This is a normal collapsible. As you can see, the glass looks pretty normal, coatings. Now, I want you to tell me, do you see a difference in the look of these two lenses when you just look at the front of them?
I mean, no, I'm not seeing anything.
Okay, but look at the color. Look at the tint.
Oh, so if I move it to the light.
See how this lens looks? It looks yellow. It looks
It has like a
Right.
tinge of like orange and yellow.
So some of them were using radioactive elements, slightly radioactive. So
Radioactive, you say?
you'll see so the value difference is quite different. A radioactive is going to be double to quadruple or more of the
Gotcha.
price, depending on serial numbers and things like that. But
Oh,
in my opinion, one of the greatest lenses ever made for film is a radioactive collapsible Summicron. Again, with like T-Max 100.
because again, like
Incredible.
for those of you that can't get the detail shot, like I'm pointing this at the light, and this softbox here, on the non-radioactive version, you kind of see the blue, the coolness of the light.
You're seeing the coatings.
Yeah, and then here you're getting this reflection where it's clearly yellow, orange.
Right.
It's warmer.
Which,
Wow.
when we put a yellow or an orange filter on a lens,
Yeah.
that's going to increase contrast for black and white. So, in a way, this kind of works like a built-in yellow filter, and
Got
it
it.
increases contrast in the lenses. And of course, for reasons of radioactivity and not wanting to harm the factory workers, we've moved away from that nowadays. But some of my favorite lenses, even outside of Leica, are some of the most radioactive lenses. They just have a different look to them, especially
How
on film.
much of that radioactivity is going to harm us?
I wouldn't sleep with this under my pillow, but otherwise keep it in another room. It's very, very light. So there's certain serial numbers. The earlier ones are going to typically
Very light.
very light. Yes.
Do I need to put a disclaimer on this video now? Like, what are we talking about here, man? Listen, if you've had your kids already, or you don't mind a three-eyed fish, that's the one to get.
Yes. 3 or 4 eyed, exactly.
There you go.
But yeah, this lens is it's one of my all-time favorites.
And again, you're getting just a touch more contrast
Yeah.
compared to a rigid or the non.
Yeah, I mean, I would say since rigid has kind of modern coatings, it's going to be a similar feel. But
Right.
for some reason, just the rendering of this, also on a monochrome camera, a modern monochrome camera, a rigid or the radioactive is amazing. I mean, will absolutely blow your mind.
Okay.
And on monochrome with any lens, it helps you focus on rendering characteristics
Okay.
rather than being distracted by colors and things like that. So this lens on that's my fascination with the M. We can take a lens, this is a screw mount version also, by the way. So these come in screw mount where you get an adapter
Right.
and you can put on an M, or they come in bayonet mount as well. The earlier versions where you'll have radioactivity in them are generally going to be screw mount. Like this came out in 1953, a year before the M.
Right.
So you're going to see that, the earlier ones are going to be screw mount, and then some in bayonet mount as well for M. Doesn't matter either way. You just get an adapter, brings up the frame lines. It's rangefinder coupled. It works perfectly.
Now here's the thing to consider: is like, do you walk in asking for a radioactive lens? Like, how do you know to delineate between the two versions? When you're looking at, okay, I
Yeah.
want to get this, collapsible 50
Yep.
millimeter lens, Summicron. How do you know to look out for that one if you want some of that good old
So
gamma?
this is a bit of a tricky thing because earlier serial numbers generally are going to mean that it's going to be a better chance of radioactivity,
Right.
but it doesn't guarantee it. So it's really done by look. You can just look into the lens, you can see how yellow this is. But
So
basically,
you got to walk into a place.
yes,
and-
exactly. You
right.
you do need to do some research. Look for the different lenses, but 920 is the starting serial number. 920, as they go on, and then kind of up to 109. So over a million, 109 is
Yeah.
kind of where there's two different types of radioactivity in the elements depending on what year you get. But yeah, anywhere from like a 920 to a 109 is kind of going to be where you find that radioactivity.
Okay.
And what I'm referring to is the first three numbers of the serial.
Let's do this. Why don't we just do this real quick? Why don't we bring the camera operator on this side, and you'll do a little tight on this shot. Just walk through the shot. You don't have to duck under it. That's okay. Through the magic of editing, you won't even
Yes.
see what just happened here. But just give us a tight of these lenses. See if you can get that reflection. You can see that coating coming through. Let me actually take a peek back here as this is happening. But yeah, right over there.
I don't know if maybe taking the cap off would help you see it better.
Yeah, let's
For example, this is a bayonet mount. I collect many of these. I love these lenses. So this is a bayonet mount version, which is later, which also explains why you're not seeing the radioactivity in it.
So yeah, you can actually kind of see here. So the one you're holding, you have a bit of that coolness. You can see that softbox kind of reflecting. And here it's that
If we
one.
set them down like this, you can kind of see with that softbox. This way might help a bit too. Yeah, I mean, I can see a big difference here. Kind of that radioactivity, that orange, the yellow kind of glow that you see coming through there.
Wow.
I wouldn't worry about, I have to get a radioactive. Start with something like this. It's amazing. If you can find a radioactive, awesome.
Okay.
It's cool. I think these are both lenses that, if you buy a good copy, you can use it for as long as you want, and it's always going to be worth what you paid for it, which is really nice. A lot of these vintage lenses, if you buy them right, they hold their value, and that's what I love about them. I can enjoy them, I can use them, and at some point, if I want to move on into something different, you can sell them, but the radioactive is typically going to hold more value. So just a random consideration to have with that for sure.
Okay, and you got one more 50 for us, right?
Yes, I do.
So what is
Which
this
I
one?
think this might be your 50 that we're talking about.
Okay.
So this is a pretty special lens. This is a version 2 Summilux, but it looks like a version 1. So they call this a transitional lens. It's version 2 optics, but it looks like a version 1. Or this looks like a mini 1.2 Noctilux, which is pretty cool. So it's...
I was going to say that,
yeah.
that sort of reissue Noctilux.
Yeah, it looks like this, but it looks smaller, right?
Right.
This is a pretty special version in black. Many different versions. You'll find them more commonly in silver, but this is, I think, if I'm not mistaken, this optical design is the longest running Leica optical design of all time. This ran from 1960, mid 1960s, late 1960s, all the way to 2004. Sorry, when they came out with essentially that lens, the Aspherical. So it was version 1 for just a couple years, which was more based on the Summit. So that's like very soft. You told me you had a Summit experience.
Yeah.
I'm not a huge fan of the Summit. It's a little bit too soft for me, but if you want just ultimate, just insane bloom and glow, the Summit. The Summilux was really just a slightly improved version of that in the first version, but version 2, vastly improved optical performance, but still absolute beautiful character. I would say this is...
Is this another one of those, like, you stop it down to 4, 5, 6, that you're going to get
it does help,
Yeah.
but I would say the rigid and the collapsible are still more that middle ground of like...
Right.
If someone's like used to modern sharpness, maybe this is a better option. But honestly, I am pretty shocked how good this performs. So this is a middle ground between like a crazy Summit version 1 Summilux and maybe a rigid. So it's amazing all the little intricacies we have in there.
Yeah.
But yeah, this lens, I feel like for you, this is going to be much sharper. It's going to be perfect, clinical-ish, with some more character. But this lens is just going to, it's that beautiful brush that you're painting with. If you want, especially where you travel, like amazing places, Sri Lanka, India, where it's so vibrant, so color. Even the dirt in the photos I see, and it's like these amazing colors and just so much going on. This is such a painterly lens. It definitely gives that painterly look.
Okay.
So I really love the version 2 Summilux. Like I said, silver is going to be much more common. There's 4 or 5 different versions of black, and basically what you're varying is the amount of brass versus aluminum. So this has a brass ring here that's black painted, and then you have black anodized on the rest of the lens.
Wow.
So again, a massive, almost shocking difference in price. And another thing, got to be careful of fakes. One thing I want to mention kind of quickly is another thing to look out for, because it's kind of reminding me of this. One of my biggest pet peeves is when you go on eBay, you go on whatever, and it says repainted by Leica, repainted by Lights in the 1980s. Okay, can you prove it to me? And 100% of the time, almost 99.9%, oh no, just take my word for it. And you'll see these lenses in the, if a lens is maybe in black paint, it's a $25,000 lens. You'll see them, oh, it's $15,000. Oh, it's a good deal. In my opinion, do not ever buy a lens like that unless you can prove it. I could tell you Jesus painted my lens and asked $1 million for it. So that's something that's a big pet peeve of mine. Yeah. So really watch out for that, because I get people that have started, they buy some of this stuff, and that, you know what, I'm ready for my black paint lens, but man, they're so expensive. Here's this one for, half the price, still expensive, but it's repainted by Leica. That should be good, right? Like, that's still considered a Leica lens, but really got to watch out for that. I highly recommend staying away from that.
It's almost like in the watch space where they might find an AP that's like made by AP, and then these sort of like, they do versions where they're customized. But then there's also these aftermarket ones where it's jewelers that are taking it, an AP design, and recreating it. It's not the same watch.
And that's another thing. So we kind of have three different variations here. You'll have a silver lens. You have black paint original. Four versions, I guess. You have one that's claimed to be painted by Leica, repainted. And then you have what's called a repaint. You'll see that a lot. So that's done by a third-party company. There's nothing wrong with that. There's a couple companies that do it really well. There's some companies that do really poorly. Kanto in Japan is probably regarded as the best, and I would say they're the only people that, when they paint the lens, they at least retain the initial value or sometimes exceed it. So a Kanto lens is really regarded as the best painting. They're one of the only, or maybe the only, like, certified Leica service centers in Japan.
Right.
The only problem with Kanto, and the reason why you'll see their lenses are quite expensive, or their cameras, it's, I think, a 3-year wait right now.
Wow.
But they do an amazing job repainting. So if you want black paint, you don't want the price. Shuido is a Taiwanese company that's, I think, doing really nice work. But Kanto is kind of like regarded as the best. But
it's like a benchmark.
I've seen Shuido is really improved. They do some really beautiful work too. Nothing wrong with buying a repaint.
Right.
Just be careful. Don't pay too much for it.
Right.
It's not worth what an original, or it's worth slightly more maybe than a regular one, but don't overpay for that. And there's nothing wrong with it. They're beautiful lenses.
Okay, we're gonna wrap this up on two sort of wild card lenses that you want to show me that wouldn't sit high on my list, but you want to show me. What's the first one you got for us?
Something unique. This is a 28. I don't have too many 28s as you see here, although I do love 28s. I have basically a modern one, and this is a vintage. So this is an Elmerit version 1, referred to as a 9-element, like we talked about 8 elements. So it's 9 elements. This is probably the highest regarded 28 millimeter that Leica's ever made, as far as collectability and kind of desirability within the market. Now, if you take the back cap off, you're going to be kind of shocked. It has a very far protruding rear element, which can cause some problems on modern cameras.
Right.
On the M11s, this works great because it's using the live view metering on the sensor versus like kind of the older camera. So on M10 generation digital or older, the metering doesn't work properly.
Right.
But on an M11, it works great. Now, obviously, this is a 2.8. You're not going to go outside and blow the background out, but this lens is very low distortion. And the best thing, my girlfriend Charlize just shot some photos in Switzerland with this. Architecturally, it has the most, it looks like a painting. It is so beautiful. I'll have to show you some photos later. Maybe we can insert some here, but it is such a painterly, beautiful, glowy, just gorgeous look. And again, when you stop it down, you get some edge-to-edge sharpness. So this is optically regarded very, very high performance, but wide open. Beautiful for portraits. You get, a nice background separation, a good glow. But this is a very special lens. These, and it has this bizarre
I'm about to break this lens on camera, so I'm just going to hand it to you.
You don't want to break this hood or the rear cap because they're worth more than a lot of lenses.
Got it.
But it kind of has this. So this is based on
information I could have used at the beginning of this video. Continue.
It's kind of based on like an Angulon design.
Right.
So
similar to that 21.
Yeah, exactly. So an Angulon design, but this was designed by Leica themselves, where some of the other wide angles were done with like Schneider and collaboration. So this
made in Canada?
Yes. Yeah. So they have Canadian versions and German versions of this.
Got it.
German versions can be a little bit more expensive. Kind of like this 8-element we have here. There's different variations. There's black with yellow scale, black with red scale, black red scale with a brass tab is kind of the most desirable. That made in Germany would be a little more desirable than this, but just kind of a wild card. You know, again, amazing on film, great on monochrome. It's beautiful, kind of a painterly look. So just one I kind of wanted to add in here. Also kind of a legendary lens, but a lot less well known than like a rigid or 8.
Of course. And the last one you got here, this is a weird one. What's that?
This is an ultra freaky lens, and kind of the epitome of why I love Leica M's. This is a lens from, I think, the mid 1930s, believe it or not. So it's a screw mount lens, but like we adapted with our collapsible here, you can put an adapter on there and use it with a brand new modern camera. So what this is, it's called a Hector 73 millimeter 1.9. So very weird focal length.
Tell me about Hector here.
So my friend Hector here, this is before coatings existed. So it's an uncoated lens, ultra low contrast. So kind of a look that a lot of people in Hollywood are going for nowadays.
Right.
Uncoated lenses, like you'll see in Hollywood, people are taking lenses to have the coatings removed. They want more imperfection. So this lens is very soft, wide open, but it's almost like a slightly sharper fan bar. So it has some of that fan bar look, some of that beauty, some of that softness, an incredible portrait lens. And at 73 1.9, a nice shallow depth of field.
Right.
This lens, to be honest, can you increase performance? This is best at f8, f11.
Okay.
You're not buying this lens to shoot at f8 or f11. You're going to shoot it in the like 1.9 to 2.8 range, and you're really going to love that beautiful uncorrected bokeh in the background. And just kind of that beautiful painterly portrait lens. It's amazing for that. So
it's almost if you wanted this super character lens, once in a while, special occasions kind of thing.
This is not the first or the second or the third lens.
Yeah.
Again, this one's not incredibly valuable. There's different variations. They're anywhere from like $1,000 to $5,000, depending on the kind of the black paint or the amount of black paint that's on there. But yeah, it's a really unique, fun lens.
Yeah.
And incredible. Can take this mid 1930s lens, almost 100 years old, and throw it on your brand new M11P or M11, whatever. It's incredible.
That's incredible. Kevin, thank you so much. And anyone that's watched all the way up to this point, they value these kinds of conversations, right? Where again, a lot of people coming into this M space, a lot of people picking up Leica for the first time. They see the sort of flash of the modern lenses, and they might get one or two, or they might use some third-party stuff, and they just don't know how to approach the vintage
100%.
stuff. So this has been incredibly valuable. Before we wrap this up, where can people follow your photography, your work, all the things that you are creating right now? Definitely.
So on Instagram, at Kevin Fickling. Also, Kevin Fickling, just my name on YouTube. I have a channel there, which I'll be posting more kind of content. And we're just scratching the surface here. There's a lot more modern, vintage, unique cameras and things. And for leatherworking, Decrypto is my page for that you can find on Instagram. And thank you so much for scratching the surface for you and kind of igniting the passion, because this right here is what makes Leica special and what makes the M special. And even you can adapt on an SL. It's incredible. So thank you so much.
Fantastic. Again, as always, if any of you are watching up until this point, drop a flag. I tell people, leave a flag of where you're watching from. So put that in the comments and let us know what you think. Is there a lens that you have that you want to have, or is there a Is there a recommendation that you have
that we didn't talk about?
Yes,
for sure.
If you have one of those, drop that in the comments. As always, my name's Gajan. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time. It's always strange when I have to do like a group video and end the video. Like, does that feel natural the way I just ended the video to you guys? I don't know.
What if it's I'm Gajan?
No, I'm gonna keep this in the video though.
Okay.
I'm gonna keep this in the video.
Okay.
I hate the way people end videos when it's like it's so formal. You know what I mean? Like all of a sudden our voice and tenor, just everything changes.
You know what though? I mean, we're sharing the common nerd out of Leica.
Yes.
It doesn't matter. We had our fun time.
Yeah,
right?
This is true. True. I mean, look, if you have a better way we can end these videos, I'd love to hear it.
A recommendation or a better end.
Yeah, because a lot of people want to talk shit about how we end these videos. I'm not seeing a better way to do it out there. Anyway, I digress. Let's talk about some cameras off camera.
Definitely. Sounds good.